Some people see a uniform and make assumptions. Others see a soul behind the scenes. What happens next will challenge everything the courtroom thought it knew. Let us know in the comments section below where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe to follow the journey of service, honor, and unexpected justice. The judge didn't look up when she entered. "Absolutely not," he said, voice clipped. "This is a court of law, not a hospital wing." Cameron Foster had barely made it in time. Her sneakers squeaked faintly on the polished floor. The blue scrubs, streaked faintly with antiseptic stains and exhaustion, clung to her skin like a second battle-worn uniform. Her hair was tied back in a messy bun, and the only makeup on her face was the sweat of a 14-hour shift spent lifting wounded veterans out of bed, comforting families, and holding the hand of a man who died with his daughter on speakerphone. She didn't flinch. "I apologize, Your Honor," Cameron said, voice firm but low. "I came directly from work." "Clearly," Judge Malcolm Barrett replied, finally lifting his head, expression carved from marble. "This court expects respect. You wouldn't show up to a funeral dressed like that, would you?" Cameron's gaze held steady. Behind her, murmurs flickered across the pews. The air in the courtroom stiffened, thick with expectation. Some watched the judge's gavel like it might snap down at any moment. Others shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to be offended for the court or for her. Judge Barrett leaned back, interlacing his fingers. "You are Ms. Foster, correct?" His eyes scanned a document in front of him. "Cameron Foster, here regarding a late affidavit for veteran health documentation tied to the estate of—" His voice faltered, just slightly. Cameron noticed. "Colonel David Foster," she said. Barrett looked up. The name seemed to land like a stone in a quiet pond, breaking the stillness. Cameron didn't add that David Foster was her father. She didn't mention the flags folded in her apartment closet or the way she'd whispered goodbye to a casket as the honor guard played taps. That part never seemed to matter. Not until people read the letter. "Nevertheless," Barrett said, frowning as if the room's reaction irritated him, "Miss Foster, this is not appropriate attire for any legal proceeding, regardless of circumstance. This court has standards. And if we lose those, we lose everything." "I understand," Cameron said, stepping forward. "But with all due respect, I wasn't going to delay the hearing just to change clothes. I thought showing up mattered more." The court clerk shifted in her seat. One of the veteran counselors at the back, a grizzled man with a cane and a purple heart pin, nodded slowly to himself. No one else spoke. Barrett looked down again. "This will be noted. We'll proceed." Cameron reached into the inner pocket of her fleece-lined scrub jacket. Her fingers curled around the old envelope. Yellowed edges, smudged corners. The seal had been broken only once, on the day she found it. She stepped forward again, extending the letter with both hands. "This was requested by the Department of Defense to be entered into evidence," she said. "Per the terms of Section 4 of Title 10, direct correspondence from the Secretary." Barrett hesitated, took the envelope. His eyes narrowed at the seal on the back. He glanced at the courtroom clerk, who looked just as surprised as he did. The judge cleared his throat, tore it open, and then he read. The moment lasted too long for comfort. 1 page. 2. His eyes moved slower with each line. The ridges around his mouth softened. His posture adjusted. First unconsciously, then deliberately. Something in him was shifting, and the silence in the room was now total. Cameron stood still. She wasn't trembling, not like the last time she held that letter. Not like when she'd first found it in a military folder labeled, "In the event of my death." It was strange how something written in ink could carry a man's voice across the years. Strange how you could learn more about someone after they were gone than you ever did while they were alive. Barrett exhaled. He looked up and for the first time truly saw her. "You said you came straight from the hospital?" Cameron nodded once. "VA medical," she said. "I worked nights." Barrett's mouth opened slightly, as if he might ask more, but he stopped himself. Instead, he looked down at the letter again, then to the clerk, then to the veterans in the back row who had begun sitting a little taller. "This court will take a brief recess," he announced suddenly. 10 minutes. The gavel fell with a loud crack. Cameron didn't move. She didn't sit. She waited. She'd learned how to do that over years spent in waiting rooms, emergency rooms, grief rooms. The judge stood, walked down from the bench without removing his robe. He approached slowly, the letter still in hand. The courtroom's attention now swiveled to him like a turning tide. "I owe you an apology, Miss Foster." Cameron blinked, surprised. "I've presided over this courtroom for nearly 25 years, he said quietly, voice just loud enough for her to hear, "and I forgot what a real uniform looks like." Cameron said nothing. "You honor your father well," Barrett added. There it was again, that crack in the marble. The judge turned to walk away, but paused halfway down the aisle. He faced the rows of veterans, clerks, and citizens, his voice stronger now. "This court," he said, "exists to uphold justice, not appearances. We'll continue in 10 minutes. Miss Foster's presence will be respected." No one applauded, but no one breathed either. It was enough. As Judge Barrett disappeared behind the chamber door, Cameron allowed herself the smallest exhale. Her fingers, still curled at her sides, finally relaxed. She glanced around the room, not in defiance, but with quiet awareness. And just before she sat down, she whispered to herself, "That's for you, Dad." Cameron didn't remember sitting down, only the quiet hush of movement around her as people filed out into the hall. The bailiff gave her a strange, sidelong glance, something between a nod and an apology, but said nothing as he stepped past. Her hands rested in her lap now, fingers still faintly sticky from dried antiseptic, smudges of a long shift inked into her skin like battlefield dust. She stared at them, at the thin white scars near her knuckles, and thought, "I shouldn't be this tired already." But she was. Bone-tired, soul-tired. It had been like that since the funeral. No, before that. Since the call from Kuwait. A shuffle beside her made her lift her head. One of the veterans who had been seated in the back, older, early 70s maybe, wearing a Desert Storm cap and a brace on his right leg, was limping over. "Ms. Foster?" he asked. She blinked. "Yes." He extended a hand. "Name's Briggs, Sergeant Kevin Briggs. I served with your father, long time ago." She took his hand without hesitation. His grip was warm and sure, the kind of grip that communicated everything that didn't need to be said out loud. "I didn't realize anyone who knew him was still around." Oh, a few of us fossils kicking around," Briggs said with a half-smile. "Your dad saved my life in Kandahar. You look like him around the eyes." Cameron's throat tightened unexpectedly. She swallowed hard, nodding. "Thank you. He didn't talk much about the army at home." Briggs sighed. "Most of us don't. Some things are too sharp to touch. But I read that letter once, or parts of it anyway. He kept a copy with him, back then. Said if anything ever happened, he wanted the people who mattered to know where he stood." Cameron frowned slightly. "You knew about the letter?" "Knew he written something, yeah. Never knew who it was for." His gaze softened. "Now I do." The door opened behind them with a soft creak, and the clerk reappeared. "Judge Barrett's ready to resume," she announced, her voice gentler than before. "Miss Foster, you may stay where you are. The judge will call the case back into session from the bench." Cameron stood up slowly. Her legs ached. She'd been on them for 14 hours and counting, and her feet were beginning to hum with the dull fire of fatigue. But she steadied herself and followed Briggs back to the center aisle. Barrett entered the room again, but something had changed. He wasn't the same man who had raised his voice at her. His gait was slower, almost reverent, and as he took the bench, the room seemed to adjust around him. Not out of fear, but out of something closer to respect. He cleared his throat. "We are back in session," regarding the affidavit and accompanying exhibits submitted by Miss Cameron Foster?" He glanced up briefly, his eyes meeting hers. "I have reviewed the documents submitted by the Department of Defense. I have also taken the liberty of verifying its authenticity through court channels during the recess. It is legitimate and deeply significant." A rustle of papers. The judge's fingers hovered over the envelope once more, now sealed in a plastic evidence sleeve. "This letter outlines acts of valor and sacrifice that, frankly, remind us all of why we sit in this room in the first place," Barrett continued. "This also contains a personal request from Colonel David Foster, posthumously honored for service in multiple overseas operations, including deployments classified at the time of his death. He asks that, should this letter ever surface in a legal proceeding, it be read aloud and entered into the public record, not for his sake, but for the sake of those who continue to serve quietly." Barrett paused. "Ms. Foster, are you prepared for that letter to be read into the record?" Cameron nodded once. "Yes, Your Honor." Barrett signaled to the clerk, who stood and began to read. The voice that followed didn't belong to Cameron, didn't belong to the court. It belonged to David Foster. "If this letter has been opened, then I did not come home. And if you're reading it in a courtroom, then someone I love is fighting for something important, and possibly being judged for it. Let me make something clear to whoever sits behind the bench. If you are reading this, you're alive because someone chose service. They chose sacrifice, and they chose not to wait until they were asked. My daughter Cameron is one of those people. She's the kind who never hesitates. She won't tell you about the 48-hour shifts or the patients who call her by their sons' names before they pass. She won't explain what it's like to clean blood off her scrubs before walking into a grocery store like nothing happened. But I hope, if this moment has come, that you'll see her, not as a defendant, not as a nurse in wrinkled clothes, but as the best of us." There wasn't a breath in the room. The clerk lowered the page, folded it slowly. Cameron didn't dare move. Barrett let the silence sit for a moment longer, then leaned into the mic again. "Ms. Foster, your submission is accepted in full. Furthermore, this court acknowledges your attire today as a direct result of your ongoing medical service, and dismisses any prior remarks as undue. This proceeding will not only recognize your legal rights, but will also formally note your father's sacrifice in its final judgment." Cameron blinked hard. For the first time in hours, the sting behind her eyes didn't come from lack of sleep. "We will reconvene next week to finalize the affidavit's impact on the estate case. Until then, you are excused with honor." The gavel came down again. As the judge stood, so did the veterans in the back, one by one. No one told them to, no one asked. But as Cameron turned to leave, she passed row after row of aging soldiers rising slowly, some with canes, some with shaky knees, some needing the help of the man beside them, all standing. Not for the judge. For her. She nodded once at Briggs, whose eyes shimmered with quiet emotion. Outside, the hallway buzzed. A few reporters had arrived, tipped off during recess. Someone was already calling it the Scrubs hearing, but Cameron didn't stop to talk. She stepped out into the sun, her arms loose at her sides, the weight in her chest a little lighter. Someone would ask later what that letter said, what had turned a courtroom full of rules into a place of understanding, what had made a judge apologize and a room of strangers stand. She'd tell them it wasn't the letter, it was the man who wrote it. Cameron didn't go home that afternoon. She could have. The shift was long over. Her badge still buzzed warm against her hip, clipped to pants that bore a smear of betadine and dried blood like medals no one asked for. But instead of retreating to her quiet apartment with its unopened sympathy cards and untouched couch, she walked 2 blocks past the courthouse and pushed through the doors of the VA hospital like she was reporting back to base. The hall smelled like antiseptic and old coffee, a familiar scent. Her world. A nurse behind the front desk raised her eyebrows when Cameron walked in, still wearing the same scrubs. "You didn't clock out, did you?" "I needed to walk," Cameron replied, tugging the badge from her hip and handing it over. "Was it the court thing?" Cameron nodded. "You want to talk about it?" "No," she said, her voice soft but certain. "Not yet." A soft chime overhead, someone being paged to radiology. Two orderlies rolled a gurney past, chatting about baseball. Normalcy buzzed around her, a constant hum of machines, lives being extended, lives being lost, none of it stopping because one nurse had just handed a federal letter to a judge. She didn't want it to stop. She needed the rhythm, the cadence of things that still made sense. By the end of the hour, she'd checked in on a Vietnam vet with pneumonia who insisted on calling her captain, even though he never served under one. She'd helped another nurse bandage a young man's hand. An IED survivor who had tried to help his neighbor fix a garage door and ended up nearly slicing off his pinky. Life kept happening. People kept needing her. That was good. It wasn't until late afternoon that she slipped into the old garden courtyard tucked between the east and south wings, a place that patients rarely found unless someone told them about it. It had been her father's favorite spot when he came here for post-deployment checkups years ago. Before the cancer, before the letters. A curved bench sat under an ancient elm. She lowered herself into it with a sigh that stretched back weeks. The wind shifted. She reached into her pocket, fingers closing around a worn leather patch. The insignia, her dad's old unit, 5th Special Forces Group. Worn smooth at the edges, the eagle head still barely visible. She clutched it in her palm and closed her eyes. Colonel David Foster, Silver Star, 2 Bronze Stars, Distinguished Service Cross, and 20 years of command. She could still hear the chaplain reciting it like an epitaph when they folded the flag. They called it honor, but what they didn't talk about was the aftermath, the silence he carried like a rucksack, even when the war was far behind. He'd read his journal once, just one page. It had said, "The hardest part isn't what you do over there. It's who you become when you come back." The bench creaked as someone sat beside her. She didn't have to look. It was Briggs. "VA staff said you were out here," he said. "I guess you know everyone. Still come in for checkups, sit on advisory panels sometimes. I keep a toe in." She nodded. "I don't know how you all do it. Come back to the place that hurt you." Briggs chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "It's easier than going somewhere that doesn't understand you at all." Cameron turned her face toward him. "He never talked about it, my dad." Briggs leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Oh, that's how you know he really went through hell. The quiet ones usually carry the heaviest packs." "He wrote me letters," she said after a moment. "Sealed. One for graduation, one for the wedding that never happened, and one labeled, 'If I can't come home.'" "That's the one you gave the judge?" She nodded. Briggs was quiet for a long time. When he spoke again, his voice was different, distant, like reaching through time. "Hap saved us in the mountains near Kunar. We were pinned down, Afghan winter, snow halfway to your waist. He radioed command, but we were too far out. He told me later he wasn't expecting to make it back. But he wouldn't let anyone else give up. One by one, he carried the wounded to a rock formation that gave us cover. One by one. Under fire." Cameron blinked fast. "No one ever told me that." "No one needed to," Briggs said. "That's how he saw it." They sat in silence a while longer. Cameron pulled her knees up, arms wrapped around them. Her scrubs were a mess. Her body ached. But for the first time in a long while, the ache felt like something she wanted to honor, not just survive. "You know the letter's gone viral, right?" Briggs said after a while. "What?" She turned, surprised. He nodded. "A court assistant leaked a copy to someone in the press. It's already on 3 national sites. Comments are full of nurses and vets, and angry civilians who didn't realize a uniform didn't have to be green to be earned." Cameron sank back. She didn't know whether to feel violated or vindicated. "Judge Barrett issued a public statement," Briggs added, full apology, and a motion to change court policy regarding professional dress when appearing from critical care occupations. He called it Foster's Amendment. Her breath caught. Really? You started something. I didn't mean to. That's the thing about legacy, Briggs said, patting the insignia in her palm. It doesn't ask permission. It just shows up. Cameron felt the first tear slide down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. Briggs stood slowly, joints cracking. You want to know something? Wish. Your father once said his biggest fear wasn't dying overseas. It was that nobody would remember why he went. Cameron pressed the patch to her chest. I remember, she whispered. The old man nodded once, then turned and limped back toward the entrance. Alone again, Cameron sat as the light shifted behind the trees. Somewhere, in some courthouse far away, someone else was reading that letter. Somewhere, a nurse was walking into a room wearing scrubs without apology. Somewhere, her father's name had been said aloud for the first time in years. And that, she thought, was enough. For now, the conference room smelled like new carpet and cold coffee. Cameron sat near the end of the polished oak table, her scrubs replaced by a simple navy blouse and black slacks, the closest thing she owned to a formal outfit. Her hair was still pulled back, though neater this time. Beside her, a modest manila folder rested unopened, its contents both historic and deeply personal. Across the table sat Judge Barrett. No robe, no gavel, just a man in a suit that looked like it hadn't been worn in months. The lines around his eyes were deeper now, but his expression was different. Thoughtful, open. He reached for his water, but didn't drink. Instead, he placed both hands on the table and addressed the small group gathered around them. The room wasn't packed, but it didn't need to be. A few local press members, 2 court clerks, a representative from the VA, and most importantly, 3 high school seniors seated against the back wall, each in crisp white shirts, nervously clutching notepads, the winners of the first ever Colonel David Foster Memorial Scholarship. I never imagined, Judge Barrett began, his voice measured, that a moment of correction, a moment where I failed to see someone clearly, would lead to this. He glanced toward Cameron, who gave a small nod. But sometimes justice doesn't arrive with a bang, he continued. Sometimes it arrives in a whisper. A folded letter. A tired nurse who didn't back down. The words didn't need embellishment. After the courtroom incident went viral, the outpouring of support for Cameron had been immediate. Emails flooded the hospital. Flowers arrived from strangers. A former Secretary of the Army posted the full text of the letter with a caption, "We salute both of you." But Cameron hadn't craved attention. She turned down interview requests, politely declined offers to tell her story on morning news shows. What she wanted, quietly and with focus, was something simpler. Legacy. Not for herself. For him. So she worked with the court, the VA, and a non-profit veterans network to fund something meaningful. And now, here they were, finalizing it. Barrett opened the folder and drew out the signed agreement. The Foster Scholarship, he said, reading the preamble aloud, shall be awarded annually to a student pursuing nursing or public health, with preference given to applicants from military families or who have served as caregivers to veterans. The 3 students at the back straightened proudly. One girl wiped at her eyes. It is our hope, Barrett finished, that this scholarship not only honors Colonel David Foster's extraordinary service, but also the living legacy carried forward by his daughter, Cameron Foster, and the thousands of quiet professionals like her across the country. Polite applause echoed softly. Cameron smiled, cheeks warm. When the papers were passed around for signatures, she added her name last, her pen slow but steady. Beneath the thick black ink was her father's name in bold, pre-printed by the board's request. David Foster. Seeing it there on something permanent was like stitching up a wound that had never quite healed. Not closure, exactly, but something close. Afterward, as people stood to mingle, one of the scholarship winners, a boy named Elias with big shoulders and uncertain eyes, approached her. "Miss Foster?" he asked. She smiled. "Cameron's fine. I wanted to say thank you. My dad's in a long-term care unit, TBI. He doesn't talk much, but I showed him the article about the court thing." "He nodded when I said your name." Cameron blinked, surprised. "He did?" "Yeah, like he knew. And then later that night he said a word. First one in weeks. He said, 'respect.'" Her hand went to her chest. She hadn't expected that. "That's why I applied," Elias said, voice low. "Because I think that's what I want to do. Help guys like him." "You already are," she said, her voice catching slightly. "By remembering him." He looked down at his shoes. "Do you think your dad would have been proud of all this?" She didn't hesitate. "Yes, but not for this." She gestured around the room. "For this moment right here, where you're trying to make something better. That's the part he would have saluted." Elias grinned, all teeth and hope. As the crowd began to thin, Judge Barrett approached her one last time. "I owe you something more than an apology," he said quietly. "I owe you a thank you. You reminded me what the bench is for." Cameron tilted her head. "It's never too late to listen. That's what the letter taught me." Barrett nodded slowly, "And it taught a lot of us something we forgot." A flashbulb popped from a reporter's camera, catching them mid-handshake. Barrett chuckled at the sudden attention. "Guess we're a symbol now," he said with dry humor. Cameron rolled her eyes. "I'd rather just be a nurse." "Too late," he said, gesturing toward the photographer. "You're an institution." Later that evening, Cameron finally returned home. Her apartment smelled faintly of lavender. A breeze from the balcony rustled the edge of a stack of cards on the table, unopened letters from people across the country. She sat beside them and took a moment before reaching for the top one. The handwriting was rough, blocky, military. She opened it. Inside, on a plain sheet of lined notebook paper, were only 4 words. "We see you now." No name, no return address. She smiled. In the quiet she rose and walked to the small shelf near the window. On it sat the folded flag. Her father's photo. And now, beside it, she placed the plaque she had been handed earlier that day, the first annual honorarium from the Foster Scholarship Foundation. It read, "For service beyond the call, Cameron Foster." She whispered to the photograph beside it, "We did it, Dad." Then she stood there for a long time, watching the late sun hit the frame, her fingers resting gently on the glass. And for the first time in years, the silence in her apartment didn't feel like grief. It felt like peace.